Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live. Christopher Ludwig here in London, but about to be connecting shortly to Gurgaon in India in the special India focus session where we'll be exploring the market trends, developments, and impacts of the crisis in India. Now, India is without question a market with tremendous potential for the automotive supply chain, with its huge population, aspirational middle class, and competitive manufacturing and technology sectors. But the industry was already struggling somewhat in recent years, with vehicle sales hit by a mixture of changing tax and regulations, a credit crunch that held back sales. In fact, we were already seeing some double-digit drops even before the coronavirus hit. And boy, did it hit hard. Although the country did go through a period of zero sales during the one sales month, as I'm sure we'll hear about, we have started to see some recovery, including in the most recent month of August. But India is clearly still dealing with a tremendous rise in infections of the coronavirus and a lot of uncertainty. And it's fair to say the supply chain is still fragile. Add on top of that political issues and disputes with China, and it only gets more complicated. But again, in a market of 1.3 billion and so many advantages, we still see plenty of opportunities ahead. Here to discuss the implications for the India automotive industry and supply chain is Puneet Gupta, Associate Director at IHS Markit Automotive and responsible for vehicle forecasts in Asia. Puneet's going to give us an overview of the market situation and outlook with implications for the supply chain too. And he'll join me afterwards for some questions. Puneet, it's great to see you and have you here. Thanks so much for joining. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ludwig. It's my pleasure to be here, and a very good morning, a good afternoon, good evening to everybody wherever you are in the part of the world. So my name is Puneet Gupta, and I'm responsible for automotive forecast for Southeast Asia region and India, and I'm based out of Gurgaon. So today I'll be taking you through India market outlook with a special focus on COVID-19. But before we jump into the agenda, so let's go through a beautiful quote. So obstacles become opportunities when you see them as hurdles and not walls. So COVID-19 was definitely a big disruption in last few decades. And there are no doubt that there are multiple companies who have been able to take the advantage of the opportunities, and they have been able to bring the problem, solution, and timing all together and emerge as winners. So here it will be the flow of the presentation. So we'll focus on COVID-19 impact assessment and scenarios. So then we'll have a look at the trends for a few disruptive trends which COVID-19 has led to. Then we'll have a look at the macro picture for India market. And then we'll move on to Indian automotive industry, how it looks in short, mid, and long term. So first, let's start with the COVID-19 picture. So this pandemic was truly global. Every country, every market was impacted at the same time. So if we talk about few markets, for example, China, so it was first in, first out, I think very clearly visible on my graph. So which is on the x-axis, it's the severity of lockdown, and on the y-axis, it's the manufacturing oblique service output put up in the form of PMI, which is an IHS sold service. So if we see this plot, I think it's very clear that China is almost, they were definitely the first ins to be suffered because of COVID-19, but they are obviously the first out. But now if we have a look at India, I think it's very clear that India is on the extreme right bottom. So that clearly reflects that that severity of lockdown in India was really very, very high. It's really painful. And this will be one of the assumptions, in our forecast, because when you will see that India is recovering at a very, very slower pace relative to the other markets. Similarly, not only about country and markets, even if we have a look at the sectors, almost every sector was impacted across the globe. So it may be a paper, it may be software, it may be construction, it may be automotive, right? But now if we talk about August, which is just the last month, I think you can clearly see on the top, automobiles and real estate are the sectors which have really expanded relative to last month, July. So I think this also gives you a kind of an indication that in short term, we may see the automotive market really booming up. So this will be my second assumption, when I go through my COVID scenarios and when I talk about the automotive sales picture. So now let's come to India market. So definitely it's a very unusual market. So very unusual case. So we had multiple lockdowns. And primarily this lockdown were there, when there were almost no cases. So obviously there are reasons for it. Government wanted to prepare for the healthcare, for the health infrastructure, primarily seeing that the country has very high density of population. The size of the population is quite big. The household size is almost double what is there in globally. So then, government went up with the lockdown, so cases were low. But now, when it is unlocked situation, the cases are peaking up every day. So making the problem more tough for India. And truly, we can say that there are a lot of knowns which are still unknowns. Yeah, so even after 22 weeks of lockdown, I think there are still a lot of knowns which are still unknown. And we really don't know if the unlock is really unlocked. So what are the chances of resurgence? So even I think the first wave is still not over. So what is the extent of damage to economy? Because especially when moratorium got over in August. So in terms of psychological impact, like what kind of impact it has created in the minds of the people, specifically the migratory labor who has went back to their homes. So I think seeing there are too many unknowns, we have tried to build out scenarios. And I think just to talk quickly on those. So scenario one is, so I think we have already seen green shoots for the automotive industry. And we have seen that, the industry has already gone into double-digit growth. So now the question is, will this demand be sustainable in 2021? So that will be our scenario one, which is very optimistic, we feel. So the base case which is built in our forecast is that, yes, the markets will go good for next 3 to 4 months. But in the first half of 2021, the demand won't be sustainable. And in the second half, we feel the new normal will be there and the country will pick up the pace. And third is a very pessimistic case, where we feel that the resurgence will happen. There will be low susceptibility for the vaccine because we have a country with such a big size population. So the affordability of the vaccine is also one way. But anyways, scenario three is a pessimistic case. And in forecast, we are working on scenario two, which is a base case. So in terms of recovery, I think we, as in earlier crisis in India, which is Lehman crisis, which was the last one, there was clearly a V-shaped recovery. So we were thinking that COVID will also lead to V-shape, which basically happened. But now, as I said, we feel that it will be more of a distorted W-shaped recovery, which will happen. So that is assumption what we have taken in the forecast. So now let's have a look at few disruptive trends. So if you see, so we maintain Google searches. So let's see first what is in demand, new cars or used cars. So I think in the Google searches, you can clearly see that new cars, though have reached the old levels, but if you see the used cars searches have tremendously gone up, clearly signifying that used cars are really in demand. So now what about the OEMs? So you can clearly see the customers, typically in crisis, it is always seen that people choose a safer path. So consumers are sticking to top brands. For example, if you see searches for Hyundai in India, so you will see that Hyundai searches have actually gone up. Whereas if you see players like Nissan, VW, so you will see the searches have almost flattened like what it was pre-COVID. So this clearly reflects that consumers are preferring and going with safer brands, Maruti Suzuki, Hyundai, Tata. So similarly, if you talk about small cars, so definitely you can see that searches for a product like Maruti Suzuki Swift has gone up. And similarly, in SUVs, typically compact SUV searches have gone up. It may be Tata Nexon, it may be Hyundai Venue. But if you talk about now big cars, big SUVs, for example, MG Motor Hector, you can clearly see, on the right, that searches have almost flattened, so that they have not crossed what we have seen pre-COVID. Similarly, if you talk about premium brands in India, so you can see that searches are still less than what it was pre-COVID. So I think this gives you quite a better insight, that what consumers are looking out for post-COVID. So now, so let's see what's the new ABC of the industry. So I think consumers are looking for simplification. Primarily, they are looking for lower variants, they are looking for mid variants, whereas earlier there was a trend that consumers were sticking to top variants. So similarly, as I said, A segment entry B models are in demand, and the first time buyers have gone up by roughly 7 to 8% as per IHS market numbers. So similarly, consumers are looking for hygiene products. Consumers are looking for used cars. For digital is a new thing, So primarily, it's a combination of physical plus digital, which is the trend. Ride hailing for the time being is on the back foot, but we feel once they adopt hygiene factors, so then ride hailing will also be back, because in a country like India, you don't have the customer doesn't have too much of money to own their cars. So then let's have a look at the macro situation for India. I think if you have a look at the consumer confidence and business confidence, so both have been very, very down. So even in the before COVID area, I think you can clearly see that it is not only that post-COVID business confidence and consumer confidence is coming down. Even before COVID also, it has already started dipping once there was NBFC crisis last year in 2019. Similarly, if you have a look at most of the key factors, what are the base of our forecast? It may be GDP growth rate, it may be IIP, which is industrial production. So you can see everything is in red. So primarily, even before COVID here, so IIP was either negative or was lower single digit. So similarly, if you have a look at bank loan growth rate, which is one of the important important macros which drives the growth for auto industry. So you can clearly see that bank loan growth is just around 6-7%, in spite of the fact that just 5 years back it was roughly around 14-16%. So similarly, consumer price inflation is also going up. So now, if you talk about few key indicators which are the basis of the forecast, for example, real GDP. So we are talking about a decline of minus 10.2% in 2020, but next year we're talking about a growth of 9.2%. Similarly, inflation, I think that's really inching up. And inflation, just to remind you, is the bottleneck for the Indian automotive industry. Similarly, policy rates, so we expect them to be around. But the problem will be fiscal deficit, because even this year we expect the fiscal deficit to be minus 8.3%, and even next year fiscal deficit would be very high before the government may really get back to their levels of 3 to 4%. So I think coming to the total industry volumes now, I think in India we are talking about a degrowth of roughly around minus 31% for light vehicles, which is car plus LCVs less than 6 tons. So this is primarily because obviously there was a very extended lockdown of 3 months, and even before in Q1 there have been fundamental issues like there was BS4 to BS6 transition. The economic growth has been slowing, which had really impacted the market. But next year we feel that because of the low base, there would be momentum and things would be back. But if you actually see my slide, so you can clearly see here that even in 2023, we will be touching 2000 or crossing 2019 numbers. So I think we are talking about a very slow recovery for India, and it will take at least 2 years before we get back to 2019 or 18 numbers. So now, so one of the drivers which can be growth will be retail financing, because now the government has really dropped the policy repo rates. So you can clearly see last time when India saw a growth of 20-25% in automotive industry, which was around 2010-11. At that time also repo rates were around at the similar levels. So I think this will be a boon for the automotive industry, because 90% of the vehicles are financed in Indian automotive industry. Similarly, second big driver would be rural India. So I think the government has really pushed on a lot of money in the rural markets. The daily wage rates have gone up in the rural markets. The government has pumped in 1 trillion million Indian rupees through Manrega, which will actually give a big boost to the market. And we are really talking about a good monsoon again in 2020. So I think all of this will give a push to the rural India, the Bharat, and this will be driving the growth of the Indian automotive industry. Apart from that, I think in July and August, we have already seen, because the inventory levels were very low, because the BS4 to BS6 transition coincided with the lockdown. So primarily the inventory levels were very low. There was no BS6 vehicles in the pipeline or at the dealer end. So that is why you are seeing that July and August, the volumes are picking up. And even in September and October, we may see this kind of trend. So if you talk about the top players in the Indian automotive market, I think Maruti Suzuki remains a dominant player. But we feel that Hyundai and Kia is together will really make a comeback, and they will be a threat to Maruti Suzuki. So similarly, Mahindra, along with Ford, is really planning for domestic as well as export products, because of which we will see them the third biggest player in the Indian market, followed by Tatas, Toyotas, and Hondas. So then, obviously, there are few risks to the forecast. So I think definitely one is that we are seeing the cases are picking up, and India may actually get into deep recession, and specifically in case if this gets prolonged. So definitely, we are forecasting, but it's a fluidic environment, but we are just trying to follow a logical approach here. And then a third is, I think, so it may be in terms of stimulus. So I think, so generally we divide stimulus into three parts. So obviously first stimulus was more which the government has given for survival. And now, in between we saw that RBI as well as government have given a package for revival. And maybe, 1 year or 2 years down the line, we will see a kind of a thrival stimulus, which is actually a kind of an injection to the economy and injection to the auto industry. So then I think primarily there are a lot of, as I talked about, disruptions which are happening in the automotive industry, so which will obviously be a challenge for few players, but obviously opportunity for others. To maybe to name a few can be electric vehicles, and specifically electric vehicles in two-wheeler and three-wheeler segment, because government is really focused on it, and it can be a real big threat for the existing players in the market. But otherwise, yes, if we compare India with other markets, I think India will take relatively more time to recover and get back to 2018 and 19. So with this, thank you very much for listening to me.
Puneet, thank you so much for that insight. Sobering as it is, indeed, as you point out, we're certainly in for a bit of a protracted recovery, it looks like, and obviously we're all living with a lot of uncertainty right now. Let's take a little bit of time for questions. Obviously, we have our great live panel as well on India, but there's a few points off the presentation that would be good to cover now. Do you think, talking about the risks of the supply chain, with the kind of the low sales and issues around there, do you see risks to supplier failures or otherwise in the supply chain financially, which might interrupt manufacturing or disrupt the supply chain?
Yeah. So I think there is no doubt that flywheel of the automotive industry has started moving. So there is no doubt about it. But I think still there are a lot of, as I said, unknowns. So though now the market has really started moving up, the supply chains have got into action. But I think it's pretty unpredictable, whether things will go the same way or not. So I think the biggest right now focus has to be planning. That's one. And then another thing is there is a lot of labor, which has migrated to their areas. So in case if the production or the sales crosses certain limit, I think for the logistic industry, I think that's unskilled and skilled manpower is one of the key areas. So I think they will definitely need those people, those hands, so that the things can be back to normal for the logistics industry. But I think the great thing for logistics industry, what we have seen is that they have shown resilience during this COVID times, primarily because we have seen, moving them, distributing and putting up their supply chain into other sectors, primarily into agriculture or primarily into food distribution, to sustain. And primarily, I think one big threat can be, the country India is right now focusing on Atmanirbhar Bharat, and so there can be disruption related to imports from other markets to India, because now the focus is a lot on localization. But again, this is not short term; this is more of a long term.
Absolutely. So that's a very interesting point there too, as well, and that the labor piece could be quite a risk if we can't get people into the factories and into the trucks and stuff. That's certainly a big issue. When we talk about, do you see any potential for more consolidation in the industry? Whether it's we've already seen the Ford Mahindra alliance, for example. Do you think there's a chance that other car makers might consolidate or even leave the market?
Yes. So I think in COVID times, collaboration will be one of the key areas. So we will see a lot of collaboration, happening. I think, like you touched on Mahindra, Ford. Similarly, we may see Maruti Suzuki, Toyota coming together. Like we have seen Hyundai, Kia as an excellent example, because obviously, this is the time to build on and leverage on synergies. Their partners may have. So in short, I think communication or collaboration is the way forward. Post COVID.
What about India's market for electrification? How do you see that developing in the next couple of years? Does the crisis potentially slow down the transition or change it in any way? So we're seeing an acceleration in other markets like Europe and perhaps even China to some extent. What's the picture like in India?
Yeah, so I think adversity always brings out its best. And if you talk about India, I think we are importing something around 7 lakh crore of crude oil every year. So I think the government priority today is definitely to cut on the crude oil import. To cut on the fiscal deficit, basically. So basically, we feel that is right on the agenda, of Niti Aayog as well as government. But as a first leg, I think it will be the 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, which will really take or grow at a faster pace. But 4-wheelers, yeah, it will take a little bit of time, because at the end of the day, I think we have other bottlenecks also, But one thing I can definitely say that I think if you would have heard about Delhi electric vehicle policy, I think we have been seeing very positive response. And if the other states, other provinces also try to follow something similar, I think EV is not way far away, even for Indian consumers.
Excellent. The other thing I thought, one of the big topics that we read about a lot in the Indian press is the efforts to perhaps decouple from China in some ways and localize more of the supply chain, not least in light of some recent political events. How feasible do you think that is for the automotive industry in India? And is it a beneficial thing to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think for a country like India, so primarily it is very, very important because it's time now to employ the youth of the country. So primarily, if I talk about imports, so why Indian companies import? So primarily it is because of 3 reasons. First is primarily obviously because of cost. So 50% of the import broadly in India is because of that you can import at a much cheaper price. So second is because of technology, right? In India, we don't have technology. So that is why a company may be importing from other markets. So third is a combination of these two. So I think as a first step, what Indian government is trying to do is, to cut on the imports, which was basically due to low cost. So even if the companies are being asked or forced, to produce in India at an effective price, I think government is really able to address 50% of the issues. And just to add here, so we are already seeing a lot of action from Indian OEM as well as suppliers, primarily because of this Atmanirbhar Bharat and because of the vision of our Prime Minister of Vocal for India, Vocal for Local. So we are seeing a lot of companies really redesigning and rethinking and going back to the drawing boards, that how they can really produce in India, for India, and for the world.
Absolutely. You talked in your presentation about some of the measures that the government has taken to support the economy. Do you anticipate or expect or think there should be much more targeted sector support for the automotive sector, whether in terms of direct help for the OEMs or to incentivize sales?
Yeah, so I think definitely, I think in the first leg of stimulus, the government tried to address the people at the lower end of the pyramid, and then then it was MSMEs, because obviously they were the companies or the business houses which were more prone to bankruptcies. So now I think in the third stage, when we are really talking about reviving the economy, so we definitely feel that government will try to support the industry or specific sectors or categories in the specific sectors, with some kind of stimulus. So obviously this would be supported by some further policy rate cuts, which is very much possible. But definitely, I think we can expect from the government, for some kind of stimulus support to the industry.
Okay, maybe the last question that we can cover here. One thing we've seen, particularly during the lockdown, but to some extent continuing as well in other markets, is online sales. So more purchasing of vehicles online. Has this trend reached India? Do you see it picking up more? And would it have a material impact on the market?
Yeah, so I think a lot of things are happening here. So digitization is obviously one of the biggest disruptions, post COVID. So we are already seeing, now almost every OEM having their digital way of selling, and I think all the now dealers are preparing for 2/3 of the showroom space. So there is no doubt, that and definitely, in India, with the mobile penetration going up, and with the internet, primarily because of Reliance Jio. I think there is mobile and internet in everybody's hands. So there is no doubt, that COVID-19 will definitely act as a catalyst, and will really move the sales, from in person to digital, to the digital medium. But one thing, I would really like to say here is that car is a very expensive product for an Indian household. Maybe after house, that's the second biggest money where an Indian family or household spends. So definitely, I think the combination would be for digital, where the person would also like to visit the car. But yeah, you can say that part of the processes will be digital, but I think still somebody would like to go and see the car he is buying. So I think for India, the answer is for digital. It is not solely digital, but yes, half of the things can definitely be done digitally.
Well, excellent. It's over India is even in a challenging time, a vibrant and dynamic market, and something we look forward to continuing to talk to you, Puneet, about and having your insight. I want to thank you for the data and analysis that you shared, for your times on the panel as well. And I think we'll draw a close to our session. But again, India is really I think still such an important market looking ahead, and even coming through these challenging times. A lot of the industry will work together through this. So thanks again, Puneet. And for our audience, please do be sure, if you haven't seen the session so far, we have plenty of content on India during our Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live virtual conference. So you can all catch up on some of that on demand. If you go back to the schedule, as soon as those videos are ready, you can go back and watch it, including input from FCA India and many others as well. So keep up with the developments there, and we at Automotive Logistics will, of course, continue to report on the developments in the supply chain. So thanks a lot to everybody. Hope you're continuing to enjoy our virtual conference here. Go ahead and network now during the breaks. Visit the virtual e-booths as well of our sponsors who have the solutions that you're looking for in many cases. Thanks again, Puneet, and thanks to all of you. Christopher Ludwig signing off here from London.
Yeah, thank you.